something that we still cannot control quite well is the stochastic events. So events that you cannot predict. And these events usually have a great impact on the designs for our scientific work. Something that was raised as well in the UN Water Conference a while ago was the disruption of small water cycles. And this is also quite important for the Nexus, because we should not think Nexus only as a big hydrological cycle, but also small water cycles. Of course, I cannot keep outside the interdisciplinarity when it comes to modeling, research, and any work that has to do with the Nexus within any kind of project. And something that has been identified lately while we are studying the topic of governance is that we have a mismatch between national policy frameworks and how we can translate that into local context. So this has been a quite big challenge that we are facing at the moment. So now I want to move a little bit on the important gaps, and I have organized these in three big groups. The first one has to do with gaps in scientific research. Of course, the practitioners would say, okay, everybody's talking about research, but of course we have to start from somewhere, and research is where we need to start. And of course, till now, and all these Nexus projects that have been funded and have currently going on, there has been a vast amount of work out there. So we are not lacking on models, but what we're lacking at is data. And notice not so much the data per se, but the quality of the data that you can observe over a specific amount of time. And also something that could go in a higher level, at the policy level, is how we can make homogeneous the collection of this data. So we can compare among different contexts, or different countries, or different regions. So that is the first one regarding data, and the second one has to do with upscaling. The existing knowledge on the Nexus is extreme. How can we upscale that information or that modeling? How can we transfer that already existing information? There is no need always to reinvent the wheel. We can just transfer and upscale. Now going a little bit on the policy side, and what we have seen is the translation of national policy frameworks into local and regional contexts. And this is of great challenge because of the policymakers being involved, of how people perceive in a regional level. We have the Water Framework Directive, how its country adopts it, and then how within its country, its region translates that. So that is a big asterisk and a big issue for me there. And lastly, I have the group of stakeholders. We have different stakeholders from different sectors. We know this, we saw that in the previous presentation, we know the challenges there. We have, though, identified two important challenges. The language, not Greek, Italian, English, German, whatever, is different experts use the same work to describe different things. So that's an issue. And also different priorities, which already was mentioned. Now, what I would like to close my comments by summarizing a little bit. So we have achieved a lot on the scientific field. We know this. Of course, there is still room for expansion, but we have achieved a lot. How can we transfer and implement the knowledge that is out there? How can we translate the output of that scientific work into policy, so reach higher levels? And how we can engage stakeholders without burning them out? So this is to summarize a little bit how I see the challenges. And
thank you so much, Maria.
The biodiversity being there as also necessary. For instance, for water, there are many biodiversity or nature-based solutions that actually also support the purification of water, or they mitigate the hazardous effects of floods, for instance, such as the forestry management is very important. And what we heard, for instance, in this case from the Portugal. In top of that, something that has not been very much focused is health. So the fundamental role of the biodiversity as our health, so-called what is it called? All health, One Health. Sorry, it's called. So how the different species and the nature and also the habitats in the nature are linked to the human health, which was in a way or is demonstrated on the issues like the epidemics, COVID that we had lately, and other like the bird flu, etc. So we really need to have also the health in this issue, and of course it's linked to the fundamental rights of the humans for water and food, for instance. Another issue is transport. I think it was addressed also here, because the vast amount of the land area is covered by transporting systems, and of course we have the flight, the air industry, as well as the navigation or seafaring there as well, and climate change encompassing all of that. What is obvious in the policies is also that the transformative change that we actually need is very drastic. So that is really to address the major challenges in this sort of triple or quarter challenge that we have at the moment on biodiversity, climate change, toxic substances, and of course water being one of those big challenges. The water, how can we make it available, and what water is needed? It's very scarce and becoming more and more scarce resource. And something that is also very important when we are when the society is moving towards the transformation of the energy systems or the food systems is the social justice. So what kind of an equality is there? And I think that that's very closely related to the democracy and how our political systems are also constructed, as well as the different age groups. For instance, the youth is a group that needs to be addressed in the research. So really having a very close and very close collaboration across the different disciplines is really needed. It's very difficult. I think many of us has been sort of practicing or trying to do that for a long time, but there's no easy solution to that, but really the different disciplines and different fields of research need to sort of to discuss with each others to try to understand what kind of methodologies or tools there are available from the different fields of disciplines. So I think that's what I would like to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Made it like a huge step thinking about the synergies and acknowledging the synergies and trade-offs within the Nexus. But one thing that I still feel is missing is how do we bring the Nexus thinking approach into our livelihoods? And by that I mean what socioeconomic factors are needed to be studied and integrated within the Nexus thinking. And by socioeconomic factors, I mean population growth, I mean political power, I mean political stability, the social norms and the cultural dynamics that are present within the community that we are implementing or introducing a Nexus innovations to. One second. Okay, so other than that, like from the country that I come from, we have been facing economic inflation for the past 2 years, and like having the Nexus or only implementing the Nexus in terms of research was really hard to implement in a system that is in a culture that is unstable and in a society that's really facing huge difficulties. And people needs change when inflation happens. So I think studying these socioeconomic factors, not only how are these socioeconomic factors affecting the Nexus, but I think also one reason we are coming up with Nexus innovations is because we want to solve socioeconomic issues that are present. So moving on to that, I think that what we need to do, or the next steps that we need to take, are involving anthropologists and socioeconomics within the discussions that happen and within the designs that happen. Maria has mentioned earlier today that people know what they want to do, so I think that innovations and Nexus solutions should come from the people. They should be designed from the people to the people. So following a participatory-based approach in the Nexus thinking is something that is really important. I think we can also start utilizing technologies that are present today in order to track and these synergies and these trade-offs that happen within the Nexus elements, and also to help us assess these trade-offs. And finally, I think it's really important to monitor and evaluate the Nexus, because the Nexus is an evolving field. You know, like, it's always changing. The needs of people are always changing. The biodiversity and the nature is evolving, so we need to adjust our innovations accordingly. So I think that the more we learn about the Nexus, the more we are able to balance between Wi-Fi, Nexus, and livelihoods. And this is where we start building socioeconomic resilience in a climate-pressured and unstable societies.
Lemma is from Nexus thinking to Nexus doing. So it fits very well what we are talking today, because the main challenge is how to do the Nexus. And the gaps, we are just in the second year of the project, so we found different gaps, not only one, but just relate. Most important is, more or less identified in your presentation before. Yes, the policy gap is clear, but trying to materialize this, where are the gaps, particularly in the silos of the, for example, institutions, but also in the private sector. I mean, for example, for us, when we do the workshops or the dialogues between the stakeholders, we found that or the first or the second time they sit together in the table just to interchange those different points of view. And they take for granted initially the links, but at the end there are more links than they expected at initial. So there is clearly, I think, a gap in that point of view. The other gap, I think, is, I agree with Maria, there are a huge knowledge of Nexus. There are different approaches, tools, scientific tools, but how do we present those tools to the stakeholders? That's the question. For example, we are working a lot with the causal loop diagrams that graphically connects the domains, and we present those studies. The stakeholders are scared because they are very complex. So I think we have to talk a language in the terms that you told, that we have to simplify those interactions and to simplify in the message and the understanding. That's my opinion. We have found, because we have to put in the mind of the responsibles or the stakeholders the Nexus and the interaction between the domains. This morning we have been talking about, for example, the energy and water is clear. We focused mostly on hydropower, but there are other links we didn't talk this morning between the energy and the water, for example, in agriculture. No? And this connects with the next gap. How are we going to tackle the climate change in the Nexus? Because I experienced that the world is moving. It's moving in the terms, what we found, new crops. We were talking this morning about solutions in agriculture. I don't remember who was proposing a solution, some kind of solution. But there are, I think this is a huge movement. The land is changing, the crops are moving. I think it's not a casualty that Spain is one of the main points where Nexus solutions or Nexus projects are going to be. South of Spain is very representative. I think that this a change is producing. The crops are moving from traditional crops to less water use crops. I put an example. We are moving from herbaceous crops to orchards that are more efficient in the use of water. What is provoking those movements? The use of water and the incomes, the economy that you talked about that. Yes, the farmer wants to, or the user, to increase income. So there is we have to tackle these movements more accurate, and we are working on that, and I think we have to work. The last is about the data. the data we are, well, there are a lot of data we know, but when we try to implement the methodologies, we have to provide the stakeholders very reliable results, very reliable data with enough accuracy. We cannot say, okay, I can develop a tool to provide you, we have different cases. In my case, for example, is the water. They need an accurate value of the water they need. They have to apply, or in large figures, the water they have to manage in the river basin. So the transparency appeared in the transparency. In Europe, the transparency I think is good, but how you can access to the data, I think is not, or the standardization of some of the data, I think is must be improved, because we need a lot of work to implement in the model. So this is another gap. And just to finish, well, the gaps are, I think, in some way bad, because we have to face. But there are good news, because we experienced that we practice the Nexus, for example, another in Spain, in the Júcar River. There is, I think, an important tool that we can use at the river basin plants, because it's a very well structured tool in Europe. And they take it, and in the river basin plants, it's clear, they take into account the environment, it's very clear. They manage the water very well, in general. We have to include more the energy, but we experienced that in Nexus, we entered in the Júcar River Basin plant, for example, using the water footprint, the water accounting, how to manage. So I think, just some example, just focusing on one part, that this is a very political or administrative tool that we can use to enter into the governments. And I think that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you for confirming my 10 minutes. I
Okay.
was starting to rewrite my whole
No,
manuscript
10
there on my
minutes
speaking
and
notes here, but I'll try to do my best. And thank you for organizing this and having us from Stockholm International Water Institute here. We are an advocacy and policy organization working globally. We work very closely to the UNFCCC processes. We're engaged in the COP mechanisms and the SB meetings, the negotiating meetings in Bonn. We are at high-level political forums, but we also do programs. So just to give you an introduction on what we do, we are working with science and bringing science and policymakers and practitioners together. But we also do it practically in projects. So we like to see ourselves as a think tank and a do tank. And we try to bring what we learn from the projects and programs we do working with back to the policy and the think part of this circle of creating more knowledge and experience. And we firmly believe that the only way to achieve the 2030 agenda, for example, and the bold climate initiatives on top of that we need is to break down barriers between science, policy, and practitioners. We also believe that a community as us hold the applicable science, power, and tools. It all went well? No one is hurt? Good, no worries. The health is important. And that we believe that we have the applicable science, power, and tools in our hands, and that actually the coming years can offer unprecedented opportunities to narrow or even close gaps and reinforce these nexuses. So it's up to us. We in here and the communities we are part of, it requires us to take a holistic approach to practice true leadership, and I say this to all sectors, combined with new bold policies and regulations. We need to have this supported by political and business will to protect the planet, humanity, biodiversity, habits, and our water resources, whilst keeping our various economies alive as well. So it's a good balance, a way of or complex way of balancing all these aspects. Through acknowledging that the nexus is in one also acknowledging that a nexus in one country or even a region or even a local context is totally different from the others. So this makes it really, really, I would say tricky if I would talk to my kids, you know what I mean. So whilst the new set of regulations are needed to ensure that standards for impact and pollution are not only set and pursued, but also implemented, which they not always are, actions that needs to be happening in parallel from global to local level. The basis to make way for this is to rapidly develop an integrated system approach across sectors, governments, and regions. So, the Nexus thinking for us is ultimately a requirement system thinking and breaking down silos, something that we at CIVI actively promoting in all the dialogues we are having. And we also host something called the World Water Week, for example, where this is very alive and kicking when we do that. So, for example, in the Water COP, in the COP pavilion, or what we nowadays call the Water for Climate Pavilion at COP, we are not only bringing envoys for water into other spaces to promote interconnections and make water relevant, but also actively seek involvement from other sectors outside the water community being in the water community pavilion. This is to bring in all aspects across sectors and across interests and across the segments. So days like we have during a COP, where we have climate and finance or peace and security or NDCs, we are there from the water community, but we also invite the other communities to be part of what we're doing. So, and on the topic also of the NDCs, we see that the increased inclusion of water measures and in the integrated approaches within different sectors is a key part of the enhancement of the NDCs. But Nexuses don't only have national level to be addressed in the NDCs. It also requires a sub-national and regional addressing as a context specificity. It's crucial to that. So our working governance has shown that the smaller scale, for example, cities, the cross-sectoral skills are already demonstrated. And as local governments need to work across sectors and municipalities. So, for example, when it comes to matters like source to sea, the fragmentation of government's issues shows the lack when we face it when we come across cross-sectoral skills. So the improvements are needed, and new approaches to, for example, polycentric governance could be an interesting thought to break down silos. But not only empowering more local actors, but also giving the room for cross-sectoral approaches. So we see these bridges, that we call them, in three shapes. We see tools for translating research into metrics and approaches. Could be like the CWRA framework or the WFLR framework. We see training programs that deliver and train practitioners and enable research to influence the work and make the research available for them. And this can in itself be divided into tools and training, also allowing for the inclusion of social aspects and metrics and increase the social impact as well as the behavioral change part. And also interdisciplinary research is an enabler for this. So, and the third part is translation and adaptation. We sometimes forget the wording and that we speak the same language but with different words. And we need to understand each other. So when we take the water, energy and food ecosystem, the WEFE or the water, it will not always be the focus on poly mechanism. So what we try to do in the UNFCCC mechanism is listen to the climate people. We are the water governance community, and we listen to what are they saying, what do they mean, and then we ask them, and then we include the climate wording into our water policy making and the advocacy we're doing. So it gets understandable, and we can reach common grounds in a much better way. So don't forget the simplicity in wordings. Nexus thinking and realizing and raising the cross-sectoral influences is not only a gap and needed, but it also is a tool to maximize the impacts of research by advancing beyond silos and showing practitioners and officials to consider the wider impact that not only benefit the work, but also the implementation of research. So one field where the Nexus is increasingly important, and where the mentioned bridge that I just related to, of translating and adapting research is essential, is the space and language of climate, and particularly climate mitigation, where water has a crucial role. So a great majority of the mitigation measures, how am I doing time-wise?
Yes, now you have 1 minute. Yes, 2 minutes.
Okay. A great majority of the mitigation measures worldwide, including ecosystems, food systems, and energy systems, are influenced in itself by water management and water ability in ways that must be understood and planned for. And I will cut short here since the time is going, but not having enough water will also be an issue if we do not consider effluents and pollution, particularly pharmaceuticals. Going a bit more specific. And here is the EU taxonomy and the new CSRD. It is a great approach to use scientific findings and translate them into impact. It is also beneficial as it provides long-term guidance for the private sector beyond election periods. So while calling the taxonomy a Nexus-guided approach, do no significant harm, the DNSH, is a good first step to assuring that when, for example, food is targeted, that water and energy don't suffer. So this leading to that harm for health and freshwater dependent systems, that through the connecting nature of water impacts all dimensions of contains all dimensions of welfare directly. So as mitigation report, our mitigation report and the responsible antibiotics framework that we have been coordinating shows there is a need of defining the objectives and access the verified information early in the projects. And yeah, so very shortly now, if I may extend a little bit. There's a chance to maximize the impact we see in that water, not only because of our mandate as a water sort of advocate. Durk is laughing, thank you.
Because you're out of time.
I know. It is a starting point for connections, and water is that. And with climate, we see new lenses and an urgency to address the nexus. The climate mitigation needs to encompass all 4 dimensions of the WEFE, and therefore also offers a starting point for a nexus action. And moving fast. I will wrap up with nothing less than that we all need to act with a solid ambition, take accountability and responsibility to enable all stakeholders and sectors to link arms on this journey to combat urgent nexuses and climate change challenges. As evident regulation shows, opening up for science and private sector alliances hold the potential to supercharge the nexus and the climate transition efforts needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's
they come from this area. It's also because the first project on the Nexus, they were like very water focused and very water scarcity focused, and historically they originated from the need to save water for agriculture, because I mean, this is also why the Nexus is very, very high in the agenda of PRIMA, that is again focused on the Mediterranean area. But so there has been, I mean, historically, maybe one of the reasons why you have case studies and most data from there is because of that, of the link between the Nexus and the water scarcity. In general terms, I mean, I structured and restructured my notes several times after the intervention. I would say, like, maybe I would start with a couple of remarks on the science part, more the scientific part, that, I mean, it's always very interesting to hear, like, the intervention from scientists on the open challenges from a scientific point perspective. And indeed, I mean, also we noticed that, for example, there's a lot of work that has been carried out, but that needs probably most probably further optimization, let's say, on the methodologies, for example, used in the Nexus project. I mean, I noted down like living labs, serious games, integration of Earth observation. I mean, these are all methodologies that are becoming like more and more prominent in the Nexus project, and we have noticing that they are becoming even more relevant now, and research is still needed to optimize the use of these methodologies. And also the other point that in common with what was said before, I mean, indeed there is also, we could notice an extension, if you want, of the concept of the nexus from water, energy and food. We had the ecosystems, but indeed there is a more and more also request from the scientific community to tackle the issue of the nexus also from a health perspective. And indeed, as it was said before by Anna, like there are at the international level, we talk a lot about the nexus also in the European Commission jargon. But I mean, a couple of times I went with other projects that were also talking a little bit the nexus to meetings organized by other international organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, and they have very high in their agenda the One Health concept. So indeed, I mean, there is also, I guess, the need of the research community to expand to health is also due to, I mean, a global movement towards that direction, and of course the pandemic had an impact. But so this is more on the science, I mean, on the more scientific aspects. But I wanted to say something, and the concept that I would really like to stress a lot in this intervention is, from our perspective, we absolutely need to increase the impact of the Nexus project in terms of policy making, but not in terms, sorry if I'm a little bit brutal there, I mean, it's not in terms of having the perfect data to show to policymakers, because policymakers, like, they are like also investors. I mean, they need to be convinced in a couple of minutes with simple information, concrete data on the added value of using the Nexus in comparison of not using or not applying the technology. So also the data per se, they don't, of course, I mean, you are a scientist and you want the perfect data, and it's good, and we will always fund research that help you like elaborate and process the perfect data. But we also need at the same time to make the case for the Nexus, very simple case studies with concrete example that you have a politician, this I want to say, like, it's not just the politician, but also the investor, but it's also the common citizen. Like before it was mentioned in the presentation, that still like some people are finding the concept too technical, etc. Maybe the politician has the same view, may find very technical, reads a paper about the Nexus and he says like, well, what's the point? This is an academic debate, I'm not interested. I mean, there also to rate the success of a project, going back to the discussion before, I mean, impact is a key thing, and policy impact is a super key thing, because you have to convince the politicians of the importance of the Nexus approach. And once you get the politicians on board, it is also easier to get the stakeholders on board, because some of the challenges you had, it was mentioned before, the energy, for example, cooperation between water stakeholders and energy stakeholders. We have been noticing this as an issue in several projects we funded. I mean, there's always a very good theoretical like concept, but then when in the practical implementation of this cooperation, there is always a missing link. Sometimes this, I mean, you manage to cover this aspect a little bit better when you talk about river basins, because for some of the big rivers in Europe, but also outside Europe, there are these river commissions that they are kind of entities that already are putting together different types of stakeholders, and once you have access to them, you got the right stakeholder on board. But I mean, except for these cases, and sometimes it is critical there as well, really, I think the most important thing that you have to focus on as a Nexus community is to really provide a couple of, I mean, we were discussing also with some of the coordinators here, maybe, you know, spend some time among you, like the different projects, and to elaborate like a 2-page leaflet, a sort of little policy brief in which you say like, if we apply the concept in a particular area, we have this and this gain. For example, we did this in this river in Spain. This was the result. I mean, and we need simple terminology there. And but it is very important to make the case with the simple information to the external stakeholder. And another option could be, this is something that we are pushing more and more also in the new calls. You can also use a piece of existing legislation in Europe, for example, a directive. I mean, you take a water directive, or you can take an energy directive. I mean, it doesn't have to be water. And you take the text. I mean, some of these directives are currently under revision, or they are always under revision in a way, if you want to, because there is a continuous monitoring. But there are, like now, for example, there is a bathing water. I mean, this year a lot of discussion on bathing water. I mean, you can take one of these pieces of legislation and together prepare a policy paper, which is your contribution. I mean, every time there is a revision of the directive, at least the European level, there is a stakeholder consultation. You have the possibility to send your contribution, and it would be good to have a contribution as a cluster of a Nexus researcher and to provide your added value for that particular piece of legislation. And I think this is the key thing. So I don't need the 2 minutes, so I think I'm done.
Building on what Giulio said before, because I think he raised a very important point. And I mean, I'm a very practical person, so everything is about impact, because I mean, it's nice to do research, but if the research does not reach any form of impact, basically, I'm very sorry to say, but what you're doing is useless. Yeah? I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think you get the point. So how do you see impact? Either impact is because somehow the knowledge you generate is used, for example, it's being used in industry, yeah, or it impacts policy shaping or the implementation of policy. Yeah. Now, if you want to make sure that your knowledge is used, I mean, you need to see what drives the people that should be using your research, your information, the data you gather. Yeah. And then I think the biggest driver is therefore innovation, because then we're speaking about innovation, has to do with money. Yeah. So either what you're doing should lead to new efficient processes within a company. It's either about legislation, so it should have an impact on the way, I would say, companies have to deal with ongoing legislation, or it has to do basically with a crisis. And I think we are seeing that now, because I think really the water crisis is imminent. Just before the summer holiday, I had a discussion with the senior vice president, heavy industry, of a company called Ecolab, and they told me that we have been warning the politicians for the last 10, 20 years that the water crisis is coming. They didn't listen. Now they are too late, he said, because we are now in a situation where companies like, for example, DuPont, using our technology, yeah, for water efficiency, they're now so much in demand for, running after our technologies, yeah, that individual plants within those companies are now competing for our technologies, because otherwise they cannot produce. Yeah? So I think these are important things to keep into account. Then if you look at the policy side, yeah, you also have to see, it's great because as Water Europe we participate in about 20 ongoing research projects, and all these projects I see, I would say, all kind of policy briefs being produced, but most of them honestly fall on infertile soil, because they do not, I mean, they generate very, very valuable, I would say, recommendations, but somehow they're not connected to ongoing policy processes. So if you do not, or if you're not able to match, yeah, the knowledge you generate to an ongoing policy process, yeah, or the implementation of that legislation, yeah, it's useless. And then timing is very important, because now we're looking at the revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which is going, I would say, through the institutions right now. And do you remember when the previous edition of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive was established? 1991. Yeah? So, I mean, this revision, this recast of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is a once in a generation opportunity to get things right. Yeah? So timing is very important here. Now, as Water Europe, as I said, we participate in many research projects, and what we actually do in all our policy work, in our position papers, we always include the outcomes of all the research projects we participate in. So many of the research results that have been generated, we have been able to include in the process. And that's also very important, because usually we take a progressive, innovative perspective. Yeah. So in the beginning of the process, we had a discussion with DG Environment, and they said they were very happy with our engagement because we were pushing the agenda. Yeah. And because most people they were interviewing were stepping on the brakes. Yeah. And in the internal process of the Commission, if they want to go beyond certain level, they need to have justification by input they get from the stakeholder consultation. So if there are stakeholder consultations, you need to participate there. Yeah. Then a little bit about the processes. Giulio already said, I mean, you need to be very careful about how you communicate, because I can tell you, if we come with a position paper in the European Parliament, which is longer than 2 or 3 pages, it goes straight away into the bin, because an MEP is not going to read that. I mean, if you speak about the legislative branch, yeah, of let's say governance, you really need to present your position in a very short, concise way. Yeah? I mean, if you speak to other branches like the European Commission, or I would say the more the executive side, you will have experts there who are more interested in everything which is behind, I would say, all your proposals. But the legislative branch, very short, very concise, that's it. Yeah? Those were a few points I wanted to make. Then coming back to your question, now I need to quickly look.
No, this was my second question, what you explained now about impacts and how the process is done. I think that the only thing missing now is, apart from the first question, is how in your life, how are you able of doing all this? Because in fact it looks like mission impossible, because you respect the deadlines, you put people together, you discuss, you arrive to a consensus or not. You are able of doing some amendments in the policy, to talk to all the stakeholders, just...
Okay, that's actually because I think I wasn't there when Chrissy very eloquently has presented Water Europe, so I will not repeat that.
You did a good job.
But I think what is very important in Water Europe, so we represent, I think, 2 characteristics which set us apart from most other actors, is that we are a multi-stakeholder association really representing the whole value chain of water. Yeah? So big industry, research institutes, utilities, technology suppliers, and public authorities and civil society organizations. Yeah, so very diverse. Right now we have over 260 members. That's very important. So in policy, how do we work? I think the first thing is that you have to realize that as Water Europe, we stand for a progressive, innovative water sector, which is reflected in our water vision. And our vision is really, with a French term, which I would say is very well known in the European bubble, is really our acquis communautaire. Yeah, that's very important. So everybody who signs up to Water Europe signs up to the vision and the level of ambition in the vision. So when we work about policy shaping, we do not discuss anything which is below that level, because members, even all the big industrial companies, they have signed up to it. So I always when we get new members, I make a very clear message, especially to big industry and I would say the utilities. I tell them very bluntly, if you want to be part of the solution, join Water Europe. If you want to be part of the problem, please go somewhere else, because we will not compromise. Yeah? And there we also have a very good governance, because so we have structured, I think that's very important to be very efficient. We have structured the different levels of the value chain in a way that they are also in such a way represented in our board. And then our policy development process is overseen by what we call our Policy Advisory Committee, which contains, I would say, the policy experts of our members. Yeah, so that we can act very, very efficiently, because I would say with this Policy Advisory Committee, which meets every 6 weeks, yeah, we can act very, very quickly, And I mean, the justification is, I mean, everything below the level of the vision, I don't even consult my board. I go ahead because they have approved it. If I go beyond, of course, then we need to discuss joint common position. Then we have also two sets of important, I would say, governance rules. Firstly, our positions must always be in line with our societal responsibility as reflected in our vision. Yeah, our positions must always be evidence-based. So there we take a lot of the research results from all the projects we participate in. Must be evidence-based and technology neutral. I think that's also a very important innovation principle. Yeah, and then they must be economically and financially balanced. Yeah, and the second, I think, very important set of rules is that in our positions, in also the amendments that we propose in the European Parliament, we always are very ambitious because, as I said, Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, it's a once in a generation opportunity. So if you compromise on your ambitions there, you're lost. So where you can compromise is on the implementation. So the timetable, the resources that you need to make available, yeah, but not on the level of the ambition. And there you need to be smart. So when we speak to the representations of the member states in Brussels, because they also have to play a very important role, we hint to them, yeah, that in the structural funds of the European Commission, there are resources to be found which can cover the expensive implementation of the new demands in the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And member states need to be aware there because in the last round of the regional plans, at the end, 3 billion euros for urban wastewater treatment plants were left untouched. Yeah? So I don't know if that's a part of your answer.
Just to give just a sentence, why should these people be committed or support this holistic European water smart strategy for the future?
Because I think, I mean, if you, we've seen here, where is my notes? We've seen in the presentation before, we had a very nice picture of the Nexus, yeah, where we have water, food, energy, and ecosystems. And we've also seen that 90%, yeah, of all the projects are about water. But if you look at the other elements in the ecosystems, then you realize, I mean, 90% is about water, and at the same time, water is the weakest element in there. Because, and why? Water is very transversal, water is very fragmented. If you look at food and energy, they're policy fields in themselves. Yeah? And that makes water so weak. And that's the thing that we need to address. And the only way we can address that is really by pushing a common vision, yeah, for, I would say, how water should look like in the future, how water should be integrated in our society. And also there, what we're doing now as Water Europe, we are really pushing because you see, I mean, as I said, energy are independent policy fields, food are independent policy fields. Water is always a transversal policy field, yeah, with no political ownership, yeah, no executive ownership. That makes water very weak. So what we're pushing for with the European Commission is that they turn the governance matrix 90 degrees and make water a policy field in its own right, yeah, in the next European Commission, ideally by having a vice president, because these are the right people. So not even a commissioner, but a vice president responsible for water. I mean, he can then oversee different fields, and ideally have, for example, so a ministry in the European environment, which is called the Director General.
How's it going? Are they listening?
I see a lot of noise. Yesterday, as Water Europe, we organized that a letter has been sent from the European Parliament to all the heads of state on promoting a water smart society towards the next European Commission. So that has been sent out yesterday, signed by 44 MEPs. We have in the European Economic and Social Committee, they have an important advisory role to the European Parliament, European Commission. They have been working on what they call the EU Blue Deal, and they will launch their EU Blue Deal initiative on the 26th of October. So we're moving from all sides.
But unfortunately, if I may step in and say, it's the same on international level, a global level. UN doesn't recognize water, and that's the main body working with human rights. In the Paris Agreement, water isn't mentioned in the SDG agenda. So
we have to do another forum just on this.
So we have to be on the barricades. No, but this is a problem, and if EU, which I think has been somewhat influenced by someone very close to me here in the panel, will take that step. That's a major step forward, and it will be a thought leadership that will have rings on the water to the rest of the world, because there's action needed, and water needs to have a responsible, accountable body, centralized also in the international aspect.
Okay.